And again, like, none of this recording is going to go anywhere. It's for me to basically translate it into writing, and then I'll show you what I wrote and kind of like get your thumbs up. uh, awesome. All right, so let's get into the thick of it. So first of all, I want to say, some of these things that I'm going to ask you to talk about, I feel pretty familiar with, especially the axis of gender, well, sexuality, tantric polarity. Some other things I feel really unexperienced with, especially pertaining to race and ethnicity and somewhat to gender. So please feel free to stop me or, correct me, or just like, also, yeah, if I'm completely like out of the picture, just let me know. I'd love to pick your brain, heart, soul, whatever kind of wisdom along a few things that we actually already talked about in the past, but now I really want to be much more focused on, because this is for an academic work. And roughly speaking, this would have three main vectors. One of them is race, big headline, let's say. The other one is gender, another big headline. And the third one, which I would like to address later, is how all of this comes together, because I do know and I do remember that you have, a lot of wisdom on that, on like connecting these two pieces together. But I feel like I need to like, start from like, tackling them separately and then, yeah, going for it. So do you have any preference on, would you like to start by talking about race or genders? Anything feels more alive at the moment?
Let's go with gender first, because that will help you understand further where I'll be coming from with race.
Sounds good to me. So gender, I would like to start to asking you if you relate at all to the labels or spectrum of masculine and feminine, and if so, in which way? Or do you have a definition or a way that you like to sort of like present this to, or if you're completely using other ways to map the territory, then I'm all ears for that.
Yeah, so I use the terminology very sparsely, and I use it only because it is what most people hold to in their understanding, because that's kind of, you have to kind of have an entry point to people's understanding. But what I was shown was that those terms are very limited, and they are not actually allowing us to get to the fullness of where we're trying to go when we're in that space. And so I use other terms. So once I get your attention, basically, when I use those terms, then I use these other terms. And I want to preface that by saying, so, because I need to lay a groundwork before I give you the terms. So I was shown that the soul, you can call it the spirit, you can call it whatever, I call it the soul. But when it chooses to incarnate into this lifetime, this particular dimension of life experience, of which there are others, but with this particular dimension of life is a dimension of duality. So that means that there's an other. There has to be an other side. And usually it's two sides to things. So we see this as with the light and the dark, but really those things are one, right? They're really the light that has resistance to it. There's not really a source of darkness, but there's light and there's dark. There's male and female. There's you have a physical body, you have an energy body. Like, you have two things that seem separate, but they're actually one thing. This is what the dimension of duality really is. So there's the wholeness of the thing that appears in two separate forms. Why I need to lay this groundwork is because what happens with the soul is made up of energy, and it is made up of consciousness. When the soul comes, there's a wholeness of the soul consciousness and energy, which is love, which is unconditional love. When it incarnates into this space, it gets, I don't want to say split, but for lack of better words, let's say bifurcated. It gets bifurcated into two sides. And the side, one side, like two sides of the same coin. One side is focused on being loving. The other side is focused on being loved. The wholeness of it is being love itself. So you need both of these sides to be love, right? So there's two sides of the consciousness. They are both parts of the soul consciousness. But what they are, for lack of better words, is one is the ego, one is the higher self. We have thought that they were different things, and we have been taught that the higher self is just the soul consciousness. But it's actually—
Hold on, can I stop you for a moment? Because
yes.
I don't want to get that piece lost. I followed
Yes.
you right through, and then you said one is the ego, one is the higher self. So which is which?
Yes, I'm about to tie it in.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So yeah, so I just wanted to say that the wholeness of the soul consciousness is the ego and the higher self together. So what we've been taught mostly is that the ego is not a part of this consciousness, but it actually is. It is part of the consciousness. The ego is the part of the consciousness that is focused, that allows us to be loved in our individual form. The higher self aspect of the consciousness is the part of our consciousness that is focused on being loving. You need both. So I needed to preface that because this also goes with the left and right sides of the brain. So the left side of the brain is the ego portion of the brain. This is where the portions of it are where you're allowed to have language, where you have structure, where you have order. This is where science comes in. This is all these things that are very focused on doing and the physical and receiving love. The right side is about creation. It is about empathy. It is about intuition, flow, all those things. That is the side that is in charge of being loving. That's the higher self side. What does this all have to do with masculine and feminine? Well, this is what when I say we, those that have been speaking about the masculine and feminine dynamic, there are pieces of this. This is what they're really trying to speak to, but that have some limits. So the masculine aspect of the consciousness is the ego side of the consciousness. The feminine side is the higher self side of the consciousness. It's the right side of the brain is the feminine side. The left side of the brain is the masculine side. So that is, before I get into all the other stuff, that's what I use higher self and ego, and there's a reason for that. And as I'm sure we'll talk about, as you'll see some of the pieces that were missing from it. But that's what I use, is ego and higher self. And I use it from a different form than what most spiritual teachers or metaphysical teachers talk about it from, because I was shown very differently in my journey and through my near-death experience.
Amazing. So I took some notes about that. And so with all this background, we could say that you, after the introduction or after the calling of attention, you prefer to use ego and higher self as opposed to masculine, feminine, or other ways to describe this polarity.
Yes.
Is that right? Great.
Although we're talking about the same thing, but yes.
Although we're talking about the same thing. And this is actually my follow-up question, because you brought incidentally in an example of light and dark. Mm-hmm. And you said, which I could very well understand, you said, you know what, like light, okay, we can generate light. You know, we light up a torch or a candle, but we can't really generate dark, right? Like it's just the absence of light. And this is a very well-known spiritual and philosophical point, also from earlier traditions. So I'd like to ask you, when I hear that, what comes to my mind is not really a spectrum, but rather one of those two poles, in this case, light, is kind of real and existing, and the other one is just really a bit of an illusion, it seems to be. Is this also the case for ego and higher self?
Yeah, so the ego is the part of the consciousness that allows you to exist in this realm. So this is a realm of duality. This is a realm of other, right? So it appears that we're sitting here having a different experience. I'm in a Jerome body, you're in a Raffaello body. We're talking to a different thing. But in reality, I'm talking to myself. I'm literally in the realness, the real cosmic thing. This is really what's happening. I am having an experience with another version of me in another appearance of a form, but you are me, and we're not disconnected at all. So in this realm, you need the ego, because the ego is the part that allows you to have an individual experience. Without it, you will go back to the dimension of oneness. So you cannot have any experience of Raffaello and a me. It's just a me, right? Or it's just a me that is one with everything. This allows me to experience Jerome has a separateness. It's an illusion, just like the dark is an illusion that it's something separate from the light. It's an illusion of me having a separate experience. But I am having this, I'm allowed to experience this illusion and move within this illusion of an experience. So both of those, so that's one aspect. You ask me about how does that play with masculine and feminine? The illusion actually is that there is a masculine and feminine. There is just really the soul. The illusion is that there are two separate, that those things are separate, that the masculine and the feminine, they're actually one thing. They're the soul. And but we have to, as we are in this physical form, we have to have that experience of the two, and that they have different things, and that they operate differently, and that they move differently. Just like I have to have the experience that Jerome operates differently than Raffaello, or I won't experience the life of Jerome. If I don't have a sense of separation from you, then there won't be any type of dreams and goals that are unique to Jerome. There won't be any dreams or goals that are unique to Raffaello. There won't be any expansion that is unique to me or you. So that's why we come here, to have a unique individual experience. So you need the masculine. You need the ego for the individual experience. That is what its whole purpose is here. And for example, the work of Dr. Duality Taylor. And I really love this because she had a stroke on the left side of her brain, which is the part, again, where the ego and the masculine and the individual aspect of yourself is for. She had a stroke on the left side. And what she experienced was only having access to the right side. And what she experienced was this feeling of being one with everything. She experienced not being able to delineate like the difference between herself and other people. She couldn't tell that you were a Raffaello or what a Raffaello is. She could feel the energy of you and what that meant to her, like what the feeling of a Raffaello meant. But there wasn't like, how is Raffaello separate from this mailman over here, right? There wasn't that. And there was this whole, but she had more compassion, and she could see energy, and she could feel it, and she had all of that because that's that portion of the brain. But also she didn't have language. She couldn't talk. There was no order. There was no structure. So that was the part that allows you to kind of be here and move in the world in your physical form. And that was the part that was stroked out, right? So this is really how this all kind of ties in together. But that's really, I forgot what you initially asked me. I started going somewhere, but that's kind of where I stand, I guess, with that. I don't know, what was the initial question?
Yeah, so my initial question was like, and you totally answered it, was like, okay, so if light and dark is an example of that, but we can say that darkness is unreal to a certain extent. Is it the same with ego and higher self? And you did answer that,
I want to add this part.
Yeah.
I want to close with this. So what happens when you cross over to the other side, when you pass, is you leave the concept of the two.
Hold
And
on,
so
what do you
you
mean?
just,
What do you mean when you cross to the other side? Do you mean
when
like
you
in as in
die,
physical death? Okay. Yeah.
when you die and you go back to your soul, the fullness of your soul. The ego is the part of you that holds personal beliefs. Again, it's all about the I. So anything that is individual to you, like the I believe I'm black, your gender, your race, the beliefs that came from those, the beliefs that came from your individual, you leave that and you become the wholeness of everything, and you expand from whatever that helped you expand from, and you become the wholeness of it. So you are connected to everyone and everything. You are your wholeness of yourself. And you leave the ego part, which makes you physical. The ego, it makes you, that's the part that allows you to be physical and separate. And you leave that part. So it's like, again, just like if you remove whatever is blocking the sun, all that we will see was the light. So the ego is the part that, the ego and the feminine higher self aspect are the parts that kind of keep you from seeing the fullness of the soul and the being in the fullness of the consciousness. So all you have is the fullness of your soul's consciousness. So there's not just masculine, feminine. There's not just being loved or being loving. There is love itself, which is even beyond all of that.
Thank you. Great. Okay, that's awesome. I mean, there is so many directions that I could take this, but I'm feeling like, okay, this is great. This is, gives me quite a bit of understanding of your vision around the gender, specifically, let's say dimension. Are you happy for us now to transition for a moment to the dimension of race and see what's there?
Yes, but let me add this last piece first, as it pertains particularly to gender, since we were talking about gender. So the soul comes in, another portion of this is the soul comes in to experience, to expand its ability to be the fullness of itself in physical form. And it likes challenges. So what I mean by that is this is like a gym. This isn't a classroom, it's a gym. It's where you're strengthening your ability to express. So why you choose a certain gender, this goes right in alignment with what I'm talking about. So what I was shown was that, remember, when you come into this dimension, it's duality, being loved, being loving. So you come in with one of those sides being more amplified. And your life experience is to strengthen the other side, so that you kind of experience more of the wholeness of yourself here. So as a male, you're going to come in being more amplified in the energy of the ego, in the energy of being loved. So men, if you look at it, men really do know how to be loved. They get their needs met. They know how to get their needs met. They know how to speak up for what they want. They know how to center themselves more, right? These are aspects of receiving love from life, from others, etc. This is how you do that. You speak up for what you need. You center yourself. You get your needs met. You focus on your goals. You put structure and order so that you can have a goal and you receive it, right? That is maleness. That's why you choose to become a male. The challenge, which you are here to strengthen your ability to, as a particularly heterosexual male, is to be more loving, to center others, to be more selfless, to learn how to be in the energy more of the higher self, which is empathy and connection, which is intuition and being guided by that, which is compassion, which is creativity and art. This is why men were very heavy in science, right? Because this is, again, the left side of the brain. If you look at it as within, so without. So that the ego consciousness is left side of the brain. So that's like science, structure, order. This is something I was talking about, which is we just came up this week, which is funny, is like you can see this played out everywhere. This is why one of the running jokes, which is actually more culturally true, is where men's cars, like their cars are very usually cleaner than women's cars are, because the male brain is more about order and structure. Women's brains is not there. That's what that is amplified. That is diminished more in a female, because a female has come in to be amplified in the higher self. So that's more right side of the brain. So that when you come in as a female, when your soul truth is to be woman, to be female here, you are going to be more amplified in the higher self. You're going to be more intuitive. You're going to have work more from the emotions. You're going to be more in flow and be than you are going to be in do, in structure and order. And your challenge, your task here is to strengthen the ability to be in the ego part of your consciousness. So these are where most of our challenges are going to be coming from. This is because this is where we're to strengthen, to experience the wholeness of our soul here on the planet. So this is where gender is coming from. Trans people are more of a connection of the two. This is where the two-spirit thing comes from a lot of from the native indigenous cultures of America, also in the African cultures. They were people who were more operating, had a more of a proportion of the both consciousness, right? So we would say masculine and feminine. I would say you're coming from the ego and the higher self, or the right and the left sides of the brain. You have more of a balance between them. Both are more amplified. One, but what's happening mostly is one is really amplified, one is suppressed. And so, actually one is over amplified, one is highly suppressed. And so with a lot of men, and when we get into race, particularly white men, the ego is highly over amplified and the higher self is highly suppressed. With a lot of women, the higher self, especially women of color, the higher self is over amplified, the ego is highly diminished. And there are problems that come with both of those things being out of proportion. That I just wanted to end with that, with the gender. Well, no, this is also why men are more empowered, because the ego is about personal power. This is the ego part of the consciousness, is where you gain your personal power. Again, the ego is concerned with the self. So this is where you are the individual self. This is where you speak up, you get your needs met, you set your boundaries, you understand what your boundaries are, you communicate them clearly. That is the realm and the responsibility of the ego. When your ego is suppressed, when it is diminished, you have a hard time with those things. And they also have a hard time making money, because that comes from that. This is why a lot of spiritual seekers have a hard time with money, because they're very taught to amplify the higher self, amplify, and diminish the ego. Well, you become so heavenly minded that you become no earthly good, which means you can't function in the human realm, because that's where that's your ego's responsibility. So this is, or that's if we're using masculine and feminine, that is the masculine's responsibility to help you function well as a being in human life. The feminine's responsibility is the spiritual aspects of things. So, but that's the dimension of oneness. So if you're highly amplified in the feminine, you feel very connected. You have a lot of empathy. Your intuition is probably really high, but you don't speak up for yourself well. You don't have boundaries. You don't have structure. You get walked over a lot. You become a doormat. You become violated and oppressed a lot. This is where cultures, where we're getting to race. This is why cultures that are higher in the higher self are often the oppressed. And cultures who are higher in the ego are often the oppressor, because when you become higher in the ego consciousness or the masculine, you get into oppression, because the ego is also about personal ownership. So it's about owning things, right? When you're not balanced, then you own, and what's yours is mine too. And so there's a lot that goes into this kind of aspect without going too far yet into your questions. But this is the first kind of structure of, this is why I was saying we miss some things when we talk about masculine and feminine, because that piece there about oppression and violence and ownership and centering of the self over others, you miss that when you term the masculine and feminine, because that's, well, when you understand what you're talking about as the ego, you can see it.
Gotcha. Pardon the delays. I'm just muting myself while I'm typing. So great. Okay. I just want to write down the last thing you said, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, that if you frame the polarity just in terms of masculine and feminine, you miss a few things. Amongst them, you miss the issue of why certain people or certain cultures as well may tend to become oppressors or oppressed, which is much more clear if you see it in terms of ego and higher self. Is that more or less correct?
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, great. So, yeah, do you feel ready to tackle for a moment the race dimension? We can, of course, jump back and forth because it's kind of clear, but not fully clear to me. But how these things are connected together.
Yeah.
So awesome. So with race, first of all, I would like to ask you, okay, and I can see the parallels with gender, but is there in race something like a duality? Of course, the first thing that comes to mind is black and white, but it's so simple that it's kind of like, really, or is it more just like a rainbow situation where we can't identify two main poles, or can we?
You can. So it's very, just like you said, so if you think about it, but you have to stop with the thing that gets you caught up is the socialization that we have received around what light and dark mean. So you have to throw that out of the window to be able to see this very clearly. So remember, again, going back, where the soul chooses to incarnate to experience and play in one of the polarities and then strengthen the other, right? So this also, so I said that happens with gender. It also happens with race. It happens with color. Let me say particularly with color. It's really about color. So darker skin, more melanated skin is going to be, and the darker your skin color is, the more, what I have seen is the more amplified you're going to be in the higher self. And the lighter your skin color is, the less melanated your skin is, the more amplified you're going to be in the ego. Remember, it appears we're two separate things, but we're really one. This is the thing that we're two sides of the same coin. This is why we also need each other. Because as a person of color, this is something that I talk about a lot. I know I actually have a very visceral daily experience with oneness, which is what the higher self is experiencing. This is why when I see another person of color on the street, I feel connected to them. I feel connected to somebody. I don't know them. I've never met them in a life. They're not related to me. They might not even live in my state. But if I see somebody walking down the street, there's a connection, and there's an acknowledgement of this connection that happens. We look at each other, we nod. If I enter a room at a workshop and there's another person that looks like me, that's of color of me like that, I immediately feel connected to this person. I might not have anything outwardly in common with them, but I immediately feel connected to them, and I care about their well-being. their well-being is tied to mine, which is what oneness really is, by the way. It's like your well-being is mine, my well-being is yours. What happens to you happens to me because we're the same. And so I have a visceral feeling with that. When I talk to my friends that are not, you know, especially Black, they're light or skin, they have less of that. They really don't really understand that. And this is another reason why, like, there was a conversation on the internet that was happening amongst spiritual teachers just a few weeks ago. There's something that was happening in America where there was a trial, and that had to do with some kind of race-related something. And the white people could not understand. The white spiritual teachers were coming from this space of like, you're putting yourself into something that actually has nothing to do with you. This is not, like, they didn't understand. And I was looking and said, yeah, I get where you can see that, and I get where that's really coming from you, but you don't understand from this aspect, that is me. I literally feel that. That's not some idea. That when I see something happen to a person, another Black person, that is like it's happening to me. It is literally in my body like that. So, but my friends who are white and who are spiritual and who are all of that, they don't have the same experience with that. They may have compassion, they may have that, but they don't have it as deeply and as often, right? This is also why people of color, particularly, again, darker skinned people around the world, were very much into magic, and their spiritual things were very much shamanism, and all that was very deep in that. Intuitiveness and all of that is very art and creation and dance and movement and flow of the body. This is why if you look at darker skinned people, the way they move is very flowy. It's very, music is very, and not as much with non-melanated or lighter skinned people, right? So it's the same thing. So the soul chooses to come into a darker skinned body to have an even higher element of being amplified in the higher self. Lighter, non-melanated is to have an experience of being amplified in the ego. Way to say it even more clearly, my challenge here is to be loved. My brothers and sisters who are white, their challenge in this lifetime that they're here to strengthen is to be loving, to be more loving. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not here to also be loved, but it means that that's not going to be the biggest challenge in your life. The biggest challenge in your life when it comes to race or when it comes to your gender, it's like between these two things. Are you being loved? Are you being loving? And so this is why when you look at race, the people that are usually the most oppressed are the darker skin. Because going back to the consciousness again, being amplified in the higher self, you're going to be more over-amplified. Let me say over-amplified in the higher self. Over-amplified in the higher self means you're going to be weaker in the ego. So that's no boundaries. That's not standing up for yourself. That's not speaking up for yourself. That's not getting your needs met. What ends up happening is you meet other people's needs, but you don't get your needs met. That's the higher self. The higher self is being of service and not being served. So when you look at race and you look at it historically, and you look at this as we're talking about this, those cultures who are higher in the feminine, if you will, if you're going to use masculine and feminine, they are the ones that end up being oppressed. And the people that are higher in the masculine ended up being the ones who oppress, who colonize, who go around and take and own and center themselves. And when you look at the conflict between race, that's one of the big issues, isn't it? Like, darker skinned people are saying white people are always centering themselves and colonizing, and there's a reason for that, because the ego is over amplified and it's not balanced with the higher self. And there's a reason why you're allowing yourself, like, you're always in position to be colonized and oppressed, because you're higher self is over amplified and your ego is suppressed. And what humanity is trying to get to is the balance. This is why we need each other. I need to learn how to operate more from my ego from people who are non-melanated like me. And they need me to learn how to operate more in the higher self. We need each other. And this is where we experience the wholeness. This is when the two sides of the coin become the whole coin. This is the key to moving past racial conflict. But this is what we're not speaking about because we don't understand it in these terms. But this is what's happening. So this is what, so you talked about it. Is it connected to the same thing with gender? Absolutely. You come in with your ability to be, be more amplified in one side of the consciousness over the other. Darker skin is going to be more amplified in the higher self. Lighter skin color is going to be more amplified in the ego. And the evolution or the growth of your being here on the planet is to learn how to strengthen that other side so that you operate out of both. Both are amplified in you and you're operating out of both in their balance.
Wonderful. And if I understand correctly, which you kind of already said, but like these two things are compounding, aren't they? So like if you come in as a, let's say, white male, such as myself, then it's kind of like double, the over amplification towards the ego. So you could also say perhaps the soul in this case chose a pretty extreme way to come into the world. And the same would be for a female person of color, especially with a darker skin.
Yeah, you add all that in and you can see the spectrum, right? Because we exist along each of these spectrums of how severe. There's some of us that are way over here that come in to be way amplified on the ego or the higher self. There's some of us that are kind of just sort of over there, but more, and there's some in the middle. But you come in different experiences to experience what that's like. And you're all along this spectrum. But if you're, and skin color is directly tied into this spectrum. It is purposeful. It is not some coincidence or some accident. It is purposeful. It has a purpose.
And how does, you kind of touched on it on the side, but how does sexual orientation play into that?
Yeah, so again, it's a spectrum. And so me as a same gender loving male who used to be bisexual, but I'm more same gender loving now. I exist more in the middle of the pole between the masculine and feminine in a male form. So male, I'm not going to be probably as much in the middle as a woman may be, but I'm not going to be as connected to the higher self as a woman may be. But I'm closer to that than a heterosexual male may be. I'm more in the balance. So one of the things that my service to the planet is that I'm example for men what it looks like to be more in proportion. When I am healed and I'm in my wholeness, now not all gay people are, but you're going to be, when you're whole, you're closer, but when you're not in your wholeness, you're not. And the same goes for women. Women are, lesbian women are examples of what it looks like for a woman to be more in the wholeness because they're operating more out of the ego and the higher self, or the masculine and the feminine. And this is kind of what, it doesn't mean that when you're operating your wholeness necessarily that you're going to be attracted to the same gender necessarily. But I often find that it's kind of the case too. I mean, I've talked to many men who go through Tantra, as we've talked about a lot. And one of the Tantra aspects is it tries to get you more in contact with the feminine, from what I hear. Now, mind you, I am not a master in this whatsoever. So I'm just speaking from what I hear outside. But I've heard many heterosexual people, especially white heterosexual men, who have studied Tantra, and they've gone deeper into Tantra, and they talk about the more they have come into contact with and started integrating, what I like to call, instead of integration, you're amplifying. You're amplifying the feminine in you, the higher self in you. What they found is that they start having experiences with men. Now, their predominant attraction is still for women, but they do have experiences with men. Well, that's because, again, when you look at this, even beyond ego and higher self, what you're looking, the higher aspect of this even is being loving and being loved. So when you look at that, as you're a man, you're focused on being loved more. That's what your strength is. And you're looking at how to be loving. Well, when you strengthen that aspect of being loving, you open up to the other aspect of being loved. And so you become attracted to that as well. When you're here, you're going to be attracted to the pole of you. So when you're strong in being loved, you're attracted to the person who is stronger in being loving, which is usually someone in the other gender. But when you kind of balance, there's a little bit of both there. So I see that. I do see, as people become more, the weaker side becomes amplified, and they become more in proportion. Portion doesn't mean equal, by the way. Balance doesn't mean equal. It means in right proportion for your system. So you might be still, your system might be, the wholeness of your system, your unique soul system to be here, maybe 60% higher self and 40%, ego, or it may be 60% ego, 40% whatever. But when you get into that, when you get into what your right proportion is, what I find is that the delineation of your sexuality, like, I am not open to that at all, that kind of comes down a bit. You still have a preference, like what brings you the most joy, but you still get joy out of other things.
Definitely. And this is an experience that I can actually confirm from my own experience, and also what we see in the environments where these explorations are made, that indeed it is like this. And yeah, it is exactly as you said. At least the strong identitarian boundary that may have been there of like, nope, that's not for me, I'm not interested. At the very least, it's softened itself, becomes more permeable, of like, oh, okay, well, I just had fun in that other way. Does that mean anything? Yes or no? But it's more permeable. For sure.
Yeah. And what I found with sexuality, just I want to add this one piece too, is that you're going to be attracted, even as those boundaries lessen, what's attractive to you is actually the person who helps in whatever form. They bring the balance. They bring another balance to you in some way. So if I'm over here in ego, I'm attracted to the person who is higher in the higher self. And vice versa. They bring medicine, let's say. Yeah, they bring the medicine of what you're needing for your wholeness. This is also why black and white became very attracted to each other, by the way. But this is the same thing with male and female. So even though you may be open to a man, you probably are not going to be open to a male. So let's say this is a heterosexual male becoming more balanced. He's probably not going to be attracted to a male that holds the same proportion that he holds. Right. It's going to be a guy who holds a different type of proportion.
Right. So little side question here. I mean, I am really now making the effort inside to prune, all the possible side questions, because I want to respect your time. But do you also feel that sometimes this bringing medicine to one another, whether it's in a more collective context or personal relationships, because I see what you mean, like, we get attracted, but does that also in some way expresses itself as conflict too? Meaning, like, those highly polarized relationships where people seem to come from different planets, but they're so attracted to one another. And so what's going on there?
Yeah, one thing I would say is where you see this a lot is, and again, it's why you're attracted, why it happens is because there's medicine this person has, there's medicine this person has, but you are not taught you are not taught to see that yet, and to see with that, and to see that I would say, I won't say missing, but I'll say not nourished in you, right? So for example, this is why empaths and narcissists attract each other, particularly unbalanced empaths and unbalanced narcissists, because they stop attracting each other like that when you become balanced. But the unbalanced empath is somebody who is over amplified in the higher self and almost has no access to the ego. Well, the narcissist is way over amplified in the ego and has almost no access to the higher self, but they are so attracted to each other. And when they get to each other, it is war. It is it is oppression. It is a lot of different damaging things and manipulation and all things on both sides. And it's because the empath is attracted to the narcissist because the narcissist knows how to be strong in their ego and operate in that world. And the empath needs that. And the narcissist is strong in the ego, but weak as hell in the higher self. It needs to know what that looks like to be more considerate of others, to meet other people's needs, to be compassionate, to operate more from intuition and not be so, a personality and all of that. And so they need each other. But your soul will bring you that, right? But if you're not awake and understanding of what relationships really are and what attraction usually is for, then you just get caught up in the conflict.
Great, thank you. Yeah, lots of good stuff here. I took quite a lot of notes, and yeah, we're a few minutes away from the hour. So maybe I just want to ask you, do you feel that is there any, like, let's say, key piece that's missing or something you would like to focus more on?
I would just say, like, what this is all about, and I've said it, but I want to say it very clearly. But what this is all about is how to be love in physical form, how to be the wholeness of the love that you are in physical form. That's what it all is about. And where you're not nourishing and expressing some aspect of the love that you are, where you're suppressing it, where you're over amplifying something else and being out of balance somewhere else. But it's about being love, the wholeness of it. And being love is not just about being loving and being selfless, which is what we've been taught. It's also about being loved and being self-full. We need the both. And then we need them in right proportion. There'll be some pieces of your life where you need to be more self-focused and less selfless. And there are going to be some pieces of your life where you need to be more selfless and less self-focused. But you need to have access to the two, and you need to be aware of which one is calling to be the dominant leading force in this particular aspect. I had my whole illness, the healing from terminal disease, was about this. This is why this was learning, because also the parts of the body are separated into this. The right side of the body, this is also right in line with science. The right side of the body is ruled by the left side of the brain, it's ruled by the ego. The left side of the body is ruled by the right side of the brain, it's ruled by the higher self. When I was sick, everything was happening on the right side of my body, everything. And when I began to get these downloads, what I began to see was I was really super high in my higher self and getting even more over amplified in it through my spirituality teachings that I was being taught and all of this. And I was really low in my ego. So I didn't have boundaries. I wasn't speaking up for myself. I didn't have structure and order in my life. I didn't have all of these things. And the way to heal myself was to strengthen my ego, which is, again, rarely said anywhere. Like, me and maybe two other people I've ever heard in the world say this, but it was the way to heal, to become whole, because wellness is wholeness, was to strengthen my ego. And this is what we're being asked to do on this planet, is become well. To become well, we are out of balance in many different areas. Some are way too out of balance in the ego or the masculine. Some are way too out of balance in the higher self or the feminine. And we're being asked to balance now.
Yes, I remember speaking with you earlier to follow up on that you saw it as a big kind of paradox that, let's say in the spiritual world, there was so much emphasis on higher self-teaching, because it just so happens that many people that flock to those teachings and groups need exactly the opposite. So this would be, or at least this makes me think, of the Ayurvedic teaching of aggravation, where like, you might have an imbalance, let's say, of too, to put it really like in a simplified way, to too much fire or whatever, and still be attracted to very hot food that will only aggravate the situation rather than, but that's also in a way, that's what what feels familiar. So, like let's get that hot chili food, but it's just aggravating the imbalance that I already have.
Yeah, you perfectly, this is what's being, and because the reason why it was imbalanced is because the people who had the voice, and again, you'll see this again, what we're talking about very clearly here, were men. So people being ruled by the ego, right? Being,
sorry,
well, I won't say
just
ruled.
to clarify, do you mean in the spiritual,
In the spiritual world,
okay,
even if you look at the world, right? Just outside of that, who has the platforms, who was doing the teaching, who had the power, who was the politicians? The majority of them were men. And so why I'm saying this is because what their soul was asking was guiding them for their balance. Now, they wouldn't be put it in this words, and they wouldn't even know probably this is what was going on. But so what they were being more attracted to was becoming more selfless, because that is what needed to happen for them. They needed to have the higher self amplified. So that's what was the inner yearning for them, all of the stuff that the higher self was about. So they started to talk more about that. They were talking about, this is the way to enlightenment. This is the way to, being a good human in the world, because that was the way for them. But the people that were sitting there in the audience weren't men mostly. And if they were men that were gay, or men that were already amplified in the higher self. So, which is, again, they're attracted, like you said, I'm attracted to this teaching because this is me. I love this type of, this is me. But I don't need that for my balance. That's not what I need for my wholeness. I need to understand how to be an ego. I need to understand how to be a human. And that was what was missing. That's what's been missing, is that in the spirituality teachings was that. Now, men, especially white men, yes, you need to know forgiveness. You need to know connection and empathy. You need to know how to understand and see yourself in another person, and understand their well-being is tied to yours. Absolutely. So I'm not saying those pieces need to go, because as more men are drawn into this message, this is their balance. This is what they need to nourish their balance. But there also needs to be a heavy teaching of being operating out of the ego.
Wonderful.
Left side of the brain, right side of the brain. It's just like if we said, we only taught you how to think out of the left side of the brain, you'd be in balance. Like we would automatically know that's ridiculous, because we know this. We think in science terms. We'd be like, if you operate just out of the left side of the brain, you're not going to have access to this. Or if you only operate out of the right side of your brain, right? You'd only have this. We know you wouldn't have language. You wouldn't have access to science and practicality. You wouldn't have, we know that that's ridiculous, that we really need to be learning how to have access and go back and forth between the two. But we're just not touching that into everything. We know it in school and academic terms, but we have not really taken that out and understood this has to do with life. This has to do with everything.
Great. Thank you. That's wonderful. Give me just 1 second to connect my charger, because I'm gonna run out of battery in a few seconds if I don't. Okay. Wow, thank you. I think, you know, that's very good. I could totally, you know, sit here for another hour, but want to honor your container for time. Anything you want to know from my side about where this all is going? Like, I can also just send you information if you want later, or
Yeah, send me information. I think I would like a copy of this video because this was kind of good, and I may want to share
for
it with your
sure.
permission. There was
Yeah,
some good stuff that came out here.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, totally, totally. I will send you a record. First of all, I will send you, I think it's, is it on the cloud? Whatever. I will find a way to send you the recording. Once I finish the paper, I will say, well, first of all, I'll send you, let's say, an excerpt of the part where you would be quoted or referred to, and you can let me know how that feels. And then also I'll send you a copy of the paper.
Okay.
This is gonna become, you know, in the end of the day, like a 20, 25 pages paper written in more like academic style, on which will encompass, you know, a few things where this interview or what you shared with me will be a main part and a significant part.
Perfect. Thank you for thinking of me and including me.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm super grateful. Yeah, it's wonderful also for me to be more in a place of, you know, let's say a student, and both because this is a student work that I'm doing, and then just receiving your wisdom and just going like, okay, great, opening, you know, different perspectives. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. This is fun.
Awesome. Okay, well, so many blessings and wishes, and I feel pretty clear. I wonder if I had some unclarity about any of the pieces you shared. Is it okay to just maybe shoot you a message like, hey,
Yeah,
what did you mean when you said so and such and such? But
yeah,
mostly I think I took pretty good notes. So yeah, that should work.
yeah. Thank you so much. I wish you nothing but success with this.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll send you the link to the recording ASAP then.
All right. Thank you. Until
A
then,
good one. Big
much
hug.
love. Big hug. Absolutely. Bye.
Ciao. Bye-bye.